6 months I'd been on the job hunt since I'd been laid off. I was nearly out of money and at the point of complete desperation. With over 300 applications submitted and not a single offer to show for it, I was beginning to research how to survive on the streets when a curious message came through on my professional social media account. It was from a recruiter at a biotech company that I couldn't recall ever applying to, nor indeed that I could even remember hearing of before. And all her message had said was that she might have an opportunity for me. No job description, no list of skills required, no salary, just a number to call if I was interested. With no other prospects, I was interested in anything that might get me paid at the time and dialed her number almost immediately. She told me that while she didn't have a job to offer, she did have an opening in a study that the company was conducting, and if I qualified for it, that I would be very well compensated for my time. Unwilling to give me more details over the phone, she had asked if I could come over to their facility the following day for an interview with the scientist leading the study and provided an address. The only stipulation she gave me was that if I qualified, they'd want to start the study right away and they'd need to keep me overnight. She recommended I pack a bag, just in case. Again, feeling like I had nothing to lose, I agreed, and the next day, I drove the 4.5 hours out into the desert to their research center. It was an impressive structure, designed in a modernist architectural style and with the front completely made of glass. It gave off an air that they were working on cutting-edge technology inside, and I got a little excited that I might be contributing to some sort of new scientific breakthrough. I was greeted excitedly at the entrance by a plump, middle-aged man in a white lab coat with salt and pepper hair and a goatee. He introduced himself as Dr. Alan Webster, Head of Research and Development, and took me through the building to a wing labeled Human Trials. We ended up in a small office where Dr. Webster sat me down and told me that he'd first need to ask a series of questions to see if I met the requirements for the study before he could give me more information on it. He had me sign a privacy agreement that indicated that any answers I gave him could not be shared with anyone outside of the company, including the police, and then started through them in a rapid succession. Had I ever had any severe head trauma? No. Had I ever been diagnosed with a mental health condition? No. Had I ever been diagnosed with a neurodegenerative condition and/or had a brain tumor? No. Had I ever taken any mind-altering drugs, prescription or otherwise? No. Did I suffer from migraines or frequent headaches? No. Did I use corrective lenses? No. Did I require the use of a hearing aid? No. On and on his list went. I can't remember all of the questions now. There must have been over 50 of them, but they all struck to a common theme. I realized partway through that he was trying to gauge the overall health of my brain and sensory organs and began to form a theory of what the study might be related to. And whatever requirements he was looking for, apparently, I met them, because when he finally finished going through his list, he told me that I was a perfect candidate for the trial and asked if I was still interested in knowing more. Admittedly, I was slightly apprehensive after the interrogation, as I was already imagining what they might want to do to my brain over the course of the next day if I agreed to participate. But I'd already come that far, and I wasn't going to leave before knowing how much they were willing to pay. I told them to continue. "Excellent," he said. "So, the study is for a revolutionary new chip we've developed that we believe will give people complete control over their senses. We're looking for a few brave participants to test it out for us." "A chip?" I asked. "Yes, it's a small chip that, when implanted, will allow the user to adjust their sensory settings at will. Going in for surgery and don't want to or can't be put to sleep with anesthesia? Simply shut off your sense of feel, and maybe sight and sound. Loud neighbors keeping you up at night? Adjust down your hearing sensitivity. Something your spouse cooked tastes terrible. Turn off your taste buds and smell through the whole meal. And those are just basic user applications. We're hoping that if you can turn down some senses, you'll be able to turn up others. On the battlefield, that might mean a soldier could push most of his sensory processing to sight and be able to see targets more clearly while filtering out the noise of fighting around him. It's very exciting stuff. He was obviously very proud of what he had created. Whoa, I did have to admit that it sounded impressive. Are you hoping that it can help restore lost functionality for people that are, say, deaf or blind? There's some potential there, he replied. But many times, things like deafness, blindness, or paralysis are due to physical implications, damaged or disconnected nerves and the like. This chip won't fix that or correct the total loss of a sense likely. But if someone is suffering from partial loss of functioning, we're hoping that being able to boost the signal in the brain to that sense might allow them to see improvement. He was very enthusiastic in his explanations, but my apprehension had grown throughout them. That sounds incredible, but I couldn't help notice that you mentioned the chip needs to be implanted and that it would be looking to boost or reduce sensory signals within the brain itself. So, for the trial, does this chip need to be implanted in my brain? He gave a small nod. Yes, the chip does need to be inserted into the brain to function properly. That's why we'd need to keep you here overnight. If you agree to participate, today we'd implant the chip. Then we monitor you tonight in one of our recovery rooms, and tomorrow we'd conduct the trial of its functionality. This was too much for me. I'd figured there was a chance that a study at a biotech company would be somewhat invasive, but not to the degree of requiring brain surgery, and I certainly hadn't prepared myself for the idea of having my brain operated on that very same day. I'm sorry, I began, but Dr. Webster cut me off. Before you say anything else, would you like to know how much we're offering if you choose to move forward? I was certain that it wouldn't be enough to convince me otherwise, but I agreed to let him tell me anyway. At least so, I knew how much I was turning down and had a frame of reference if I was contacted by any other companies to sell my body for science. As this is obviously a lot to ask of you and requires significant intrusion into your body, you will receive $125,000 a day for your services. I'd been leaning back in the chair I was in, and when I heard the amount, I fell straight over. Dr. Webster got up from behind the desk he was sitting at and helped me to my feet before we both sat back in our original positions. I could barely form words when I regained my composure. $125,000 a day? I stuttered. Yes, so that's $125,000 for today and $125,000 for tomorrow for a total of $250,000 paid upon full completion of the trial. We don't expect the actual testing of the chip's functionality to take more than a couple hours. So you might be back home by dinner time tomorrow night, and you'd be $250,000 richer. The look on his face told me that he knew it would be nearly impossible for me to turn down the amount of money. I don't know. My mind wasn't processing information properly. Holy shit. That would change my whole life. We know. To be perfectly frank with you, you weren't chosen at random. We're aware that you've been unemployed for some time and that you could use a break. Candidates for this trial are all in need of an opportunity, and we're willing to provide one. All you need to do is sign here. He pushed a clipboard in front of me, and I instinctively reached for the pen, but stopped myself. I got the feeling he was trying to rush me before I could think about it all too hard. Hold on. Let's just slow down for a second. With a moment to pause, his words sunk in, and something was bothering me. First, how did you know about my unemployment status? You just out combing the internet for the most desperate? Why not grab homeless people off the streets instead? He looked annoyed at my question. Unfortunately, I can't disclose our recruiting process to you as it's confidential, but I wouldn't frame it so harshly. Like I said, we look for people that are really in need of an opportunity, as we understand that participating in a trial like this may not be a very attractive option for those with other means of income. And as for your question on experimenting on the homeless, to be honest, I find it insulting. This is a legitimate business enterprise with lucrative contracts all over the world. We would never consider doing something so unethical. We'd be out of business in a week if the press got wind of a biotech company taking people off the streets and sticking implants in them. That being said, if you don't like our practices or you don't feel our offer is fair, you are very welcome to turn it down and leave now. It had undoubtedly been upsetting to hear that I'd been picked as a potential candidate for no reason other than I was broke. But Dr. Webster's response had humbled me. I didn't like that they seemed to know my current financial situation, but it's not like they hadn't presented me with a more than fair offer. Okay, yeah, I'm sorry about that. It's just a lot to take in. Could you at least explain the implantation process to me a little more? I've been terrified of surgery my whole life and I just want to understand what's that going to entail before I agree to anything. It was the last thing stopping me from signing the paper outright. Certainly, totally understandable that you want to know more about that. His expression had softened. However, I'd say that we don't like to call it a surgery around here, as that term has a certain connotation. We've developed a very minimally invasive implantation process that requires that we only make one small hole in your skull, and then we feed the chip to the final implantation site through a pathway in the brain that will have no impact on your physical or mental function. The whole thing only takes about an hour, and the recovery time is basically non-existent. You'll feel perfectly normal by tomorrow morning. We don't even need to put you to sleep for the process. We'll give you some medication to help you relax, and then numb out the area in the skull. But that will be the only part you'll feel. While we're working, you can just watch TV. And if you're going to ask, I can't tell you exactly where the chip is going to reside, as that's part of the IP of the device. But I guarantee the procedure is 100% safe. His words had been intended to be comforting, I'm sure, but the thought of having a hole drilled into my head and a chip snaked through my brain to be installed somewhere within was still a daunting one. But all the same, $250,000. It was a monumental sum, and one that I was willing to accept some risk for. Dr. Webster pushed the clipboard closer and handed me a pen. I signed. The next hour was spent going through a mountain of paperwork. I had to provide bank account information, beneficiary information, sign an NDA, an indemnification agreement, and so many consent forms that my hand was cramping by the end of it all. Once I'd worked through the entire stack, Dr. Webster escorted me to what looked like a large hospital room. It had a twin bed in the corner and a TV on a stand in front of it. Medical equipment lined the walls, and it had a small restroom on one side. He told me that it would be my suite for the night, and I'd be brought back to it after the implantation to rest. He had me drop my overnight bag in there and change into a surgical gown before they took me down to the implantation room. The knot surgery went exactly as Dr. Webster described it would. I don't know what they gave me to help me relax, but it got me so high that I didn't care in the slightest what they were doing inside my brain. I just giggled away at the cartoons that they put on for me to watch. Everything had moved so quickly after I'd signed the paperwork that I hardly had a second to think about any of it. Before I knew it, I was laying in the bed in my suite, drowsy from all the medication they gave me. Implantation complete. Dr. Webster came to check in on me a few times throughout the evening and provided some pain medication when I complained of a minor headache. This only made me sleepier, and I recall shutting my eyes, seeing that it was 8 p.m., then opening them next to find it was already 7 a.m. in the following day. I slowly rose from the bed, groggy, but otherwise feeling totally fine. It actually took a moment before I even remembered the events of the previous day. Dr. Webster came through the door as I was taking my first steps towards the restroom to ask how I was doing. He was ecstatic to hear that I felt normal and just really needed to pee. He'd brought with him a small tray for breakfast and asked that I eat before we headed down to the lab for the test. Again, things felt like they were moving too rapidly, but I was also eager to get it all over with. I just wanted to get back home and start paying off my debts, maybe even begin house hunting. When I'd finished eating, he walked me down to a room labeled Observation Chamber and showed me inside. It was at least 20 feet by 20 feet square and another 20 feet tall. On one wall, there was a set of windows, behind which I could see people looking down into the space. The entire room was painted white, as was the chair with restraints on the arms and legs that was bolted to the floor in the center of it. Dr. Webster directed me to sit down while he explained that the restraints were for my safety. He said that the test would likely be very disorienting as they played with the settings of my senses, and he didn't want me to accidentally hurt myself. With the implantation process behind me, I figured that the hardest part was over and didn't put up a struggle as he strapped me down. Then, he explained how the test would go. So, for the accuracy of our results, I can't tell you which order we're going to manipulate your senses. We may shut some of them or all of them off entirely. We may adjust some down and try to boost others. It will be a randomized sequence. Ahead of you, there's letters and numbers like you'd see at an eye exam, and during the test, we'll pump sounds into the room as well as various scents and flavors. What will happen is, you'll hear a small beep in your head, like a thought. So even if we turn your actual sense of hearing completely off, you'd still hear the beep from the chip. Make sense? I nodded. Okay, when you hear that beep, that means we're going to make a change. We'll cycle through a few different configurations. Try to remember what you experience during each configuration, and then when you hear 2 beeps, we'll return you to your baseline settings, meaning where you're at right now. When you're at baseline, just walk us through everything you experienced, and we'll verify that if it was what we intended on the other side. Okay? Okay. Seems straightforward enough, I said. Great. Alright. I'm going to head upstairs with the other observers. I'll come over the loudspeakers in here and ask if you're ready. And once you give me a nod, we'll get moving. Oh, and one more thing. We won't be changing anything that you sense on our end. Meaning, if those letters in front of you get sharper or fuzzier, that's your own sense of sight doing it. If you hear sounds get louder or softer, it's your brain's interpretation of the signal, not us adjusting the volume. Just something to keep in mind. He walked out the door, and a minute or so later, I saw him standing up in the window above me. Addison, are you ready to proceed? His voice echoed into the room. I nodded. Just like Dr. Webster had said, I heard a small beep inside of my brain, just like I would if I was thinking of the noise. And suddenly, I was in a void, realizing quickly that I had no sense of anything. I understood that it started by turning everything off at once. No sight, no sound, no smell, no taste, no feel. The beating of my heart was gone. The chair I was strapped to missing. Encased in blackness and silence, I panicked as I wondered if this was what it was to be dead. My hearing returned. The sounds of the rainforest, they must have been playing them into the room. As I listened, I noticed the intensity went up and down. At one point so quiet that it shut my hearing completely back off, and at another so loud that I heard a yelp of pain emanate from what I had to assume was my own mouth, though I couldn't feel my vocal cords make the noise. I smelled the rainforest now too, earthy, damp. With only being able to hear and smell it, it was easy to picture myself deep in the jungle. My sight returned, but sound and smell vanished. The mirage of the rainforest evaporated, and I was left staring intently at the letters and numbers in front of me. As I tried to read them, they came in and out of focus, and I looked down for a moment at the body I couldn't feel. Now I understood why Dr. Webster had said the test would be disorienting. For all my brain could process, I was a pair of eyes, just floating in the air. Everything returned to normal. Could you describe the 4 stages for us? Dr. Webster's voice piped back in. Yes, the first was just like a void. I had no sense of anything at all, and it kind of freaked me out. I'm assuming you shut everything off at once to start? After that, my hearing came back, and I heard the sounds of the rainforest. It got louder and softer over time. And then I could smell the rainforest as well as hear it. And lastly, I just had my sight, and it was going in and out of focus on the charts over on the wall. I finished. Perfect. That's exactly what you should have experienced. Okay, are you ready for another round? He asked. I nodded again. We went through 4 more sequences like this, each with a completely randomized order. Sometimes they started in the void. Sometimes they just took away one sense to see if I'd noticed that. One trial made me particularly hungry when they sent in the flavor of pizza and I picked it up on my tongue. It was a very weird but very interesting experience. While it was nerve-wracking at first, having someone else have total control of my senses, they always returned them to me in full at the end of each round, and everything was performing exactly as they expected. I was actually enjoying myself. But then, on the 6th round, something changed. I was dropped back into the void of nothingness, but I was used to it now. I was calmly waiting for the next beep, when I heard something else. A voice, a whisper, in my head. I didn't recognize it at all. Watch out for the man in the corner. What the fuck was that? I thought, wondering if the trial was taking a toll on my brain. My sight came back. At first, everything appeared normal, but then I saw a shift of movement in the corner of the room. I looked over and recognized the outline of a man in the shadows. I couldn't make out his features. It was almost like it was part of the shadow that surrounded him. But 2 bright white slits sat in his face. He stared back at me. My sight was taken, but I got my hearing back. However, this time, it wasn't the rainforest, or the circus, or the ocean. It was footsteps. The man was walking closer to me. He's coming for you. Whoa, hey, stop! There's someone in here with me. Stop! I heard myself yell the words, but no one replied to me over the speakers. My hearing was gone, and I found I could feel the chair I was sitting in. He wants to hurt you. Then, a hand with fingers far too long rested on my right shoulder. I felt a razor-sharp nail run down my left cheek, and I knew this thing was right behind me. What the fuck is that? I could feel my vocal cords moving, and I knew I must be screaming aloud. My sight came back. I turned, and towering over my head, the man made of shadow flashed a smile that was far too wide. He slithered to my side, brandishing his clawed fingers. I tried to look up at the windows and yell for Dr. Webster, but my vision was blurred beyond the nightmare in front of me. I was back in the void, terrified now at what was happening to my body. I pleaded more for them to stop internally, and I hoped externally. This time, when my senses were all returned, I was sweating and breathing heavily. I panned the room, searching for the shadow man, but he wasn't there. Could you tell us what you experienced that time? Dr. Webster's voice came into the room, just as casually as it had every other trial. What was that? I yelled at him. What was what? He answered. The voice in my head, and the shadow thing that touched me. It wanted to hurt me. There was nothing in the room with you, he said. And any voices in your head would just be your own thoughts. No, that's bullshit. Something was different that round. You guys didn't hear me yelling for you to stop? I implored. No, you were quiet the entire time, just like the rest of the runs. He sounded completely calm, but I knew he had to be lying. I'd heard myself screaming. Look, I don't know what's going on here, but I'm done. I want out of this thing. That's enough. I struggled against the restraints. Without warning, I was plunged back into the void, and I started to panic immediately. Stop! No! Let me out! You can't do this! I prayed I was actually saying the words. Ouch. That's going to hurt when you can feel again. What's going to hurt? What'd they do to me? I tried to talk to the voice with my thoughts. I could see again. I quickly scanned myself for injuries, and then I saw it. My right index finger had been sliced off and was laying on the floor in front of me. Blood was spurting out of the stump where it used to be. They sent me back to the void. I continued to plead with them, though at this point, I realized it was useless. I was at their mercy. Oh, I hope you don't use that leg. I heard a saw whirring somewhere down low in front of me. Then, the squelching of meat being cut and the high-pitched whine of blades on bone. Please, please, I'm begging you. I won't take the money. Please, just let me go home now. I knew they were listening. They just didn't care. I wasn't prepared for the agony that came next. White-hot pain radiated from my left leg below the knee and from my right hand. My hearing was still on, and I made noises I'd never known I was capable of. As I entered the void once more, I began to cry. And now, the stab to the chest. Goodbye, Addison. I didn't even try to fight it this time, or to scream out. I accepted that they were going to kill me. I tasted blood in my mouth, and I was certain I'd coughed it up when they'd plunged the knife somewhere into my lungs. But when my senses were returned, I saw that I was fine, at least physically. Both of my legs were fully intact. My finger was back on my hand, and there was no gaping wound in my chest. How about that time? Can you describe everything for us? There was a darkness in his voice now. I could tell that he knew exactly what I'd experienced. Fuck you, I snapped back. What is this shit? If you can describe what you experienced in detail, the trial will be over. If not, we'll have to run it again to make sure it's working properly. He was cold in his delivery. Terrified of what else they could do, I relented and relayed back everything that I'd seen, heard, felt, and tasted during the last round. Well, looks like we're done here then. Someone will be down shortly to set you free and escort you back to your vehicle. The funds will be deposited in your account within the next 2 days. Thank you for your participation, Addison. I only just barely caught everything that he said and saw him start to step away from the window. Wait! I yelled. What about the chip? Aren't you going to take the chip back out? I realized now that I'd never asked what was going to happen with it once the trial was over. Oh, no, we can't remove it. Too much risk to your brain now that it's attached itself. And, in any case, it's our insurance that you won't discuss your experience here with anyone. We'll be keeping an eye on you, Addison. Don't forget what we can do to your perception of reality. His last line was dropped with such a hint of menace that I shuddered. I understood then they were going to hold me hostage for the rest of my life. At one point, if I did something that they didn't like, they could just send me to the void. Or worse. Eventually, someone I'd never seen before came and unstrapped me, then quickly rushed me out through a back door to my car. I drove back to my apartment in silence. Since I got home 3 days ago, I haven't slept. The money was deposited in my account, just as they said it would be, but I can't enjoy any of it. I can't stop thinking about what it's payment for. This technology shouldn't exist. I don't know what their plans are for it. But I know it's not the bullshit Dr. Webster fed me to get me to agree to the study. And I've realized that I can't keep it a secret. Even though I know what posting this means for me. Even though I just heard the voice again. You shouldn't have done that, Addison.